Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson and I'm an attorney with the Lohman Abdo Law Firm here in Hudson, Wisconsin. Today we're interviewing another candidate for office. This time it's the district attorney position here in St. Croix County, and my guest is Sarah Yakub. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And I guess we start with who you are, and I could have introduced you as Sarah Slice Yakub. Why don't you tell the viewers where you're from and how long you've been in the area?
Sure. I was essentially born and raised in, well, not born, born in San Diego and spent some time in New York, but essentially raised in Pasadena, California. I was an attorney out there for a little while and then moved out here. LA is, suffice it to say, not a great place to raise kids, in my humble opinion. I thought this would be a much better upbringing for them. My husband and his family are here, so that's how we ended up in Hudson.
Okay. So, and you mentioned, obviously, you have a law degree. It's probably a requirement of being district attorney because you have to be able to go into court. Now, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your education, your undergrad, and where you went to law school and so forth?
Sure. I was a biopsychology major out of the University of California, Santa Barbara. Graduated with honors. Went on to do a 2-year program at Southwestern Law School in Los Angeles. They had a scale program, one of 2 accredited 2-year programs in the country. They were offering partial scholarship, so I figured I would proceed on the route where people ask me, is that in Texas? And no, it's not in Texas. It's a smaller school in Los Angeles, but they tend to send a lot of attorneys into the DA's office, and that's what I wanted to do. I had some great mentors at Southwestern who worked with the DA's office.
Okay. And I hate to have to ask this, but I'm not going to be sexist about it. Asked it of the males as well. So if you graduated law school in
06.
No, 08.
08, excuse me.
So undergrad
Sorry.
was 06. So how old does that make you, I guess?
That makes me 32.
32 years old. Okay. And that's almost as long as I've been out of law school, but not quite. So you graduated law school in 08, and then how long after that did you get the job as a prosecutor?
So I graduated in May of 08. I started studying for the bar. I took the summer bar, went back to the DA's office as a law clerk. We got our results that Thanksgiving. I passed first time around, and the hiring process overlapped my work with the DA's office. And so we started, it must have been April of 2009 then.
Okay. So officially as an attorney, April of 09, and your LinkedIn page mentions till April of 2015. So basically 6 years. What was the reason for leaving the LA County District Attorney's Office?
I decided to leave essentially for the reasons stated before. I wanted to I have 2 children from a previous marriage and didn't want to raise them in Los Angeles. My husband is out here, his family's out here, and it just made much more sense.
Okay, so you have children from another marriage, he has children here locally. And so how long have you been then, I guess that would be since April of 2015, living here in St. Croix County? I
began commuting for roughly a year, where I would come here quite often and then go back for work, and then moved here permanently as of, I believe it was May of 2015, when the house that we built was completed. Okay. And when you say we built, you and your husband have been married then how long? Oh goodness, January 4th of 2015, so. Okay, so there was a period there where you were still in California. Yes. And married, and then made the determination of where to set up your permanent home, and it was here now in Wisconsin for a little over a year. Sure. And you also, it says, founder and attorney of Slice Law, Inc. What is Slice Law, Inc.? That is the equivalent of me hanging up my own shingles. I hung up my DA hat in LA, or I had every intention of hanging up my DA hat in LA, and figured I would come out here and do little bits of legal work here and there. I have the luxury, excuse me, of not needing to put the roof over our head, but I still want to give back and offer my assistance and be able to be active in the community within the justice system.
So prior to 2015, licensed in California, and then since then have become licensed in both Wisconsin and Minnesota.
That's correct.
All right. And Slice would be your previous name?
My maiden name, yes.
Maiden name, okay, thank you. And the areas of practice of law that you've been practicing in private practice?
Primarily criminal. I've done a little bit of family law, mostly just because I learned trial by fire, having gone through it myself. I don't have the heart or stomach for family law. It's a lot of fighting at the expense of children, and where there's an absolute incentive by attorneys to instigate more fighting as opposed to resolution. So I've limited my practice to individuals who want sort of a collaborative type divorce, or someone who would like a divorce, but there's a anticipated default. They've been involved in a contentious divorce case on a personal level, but it's...
So you avoid those contested custody cases and so forth? To
the extent that I can. I do, I haven't had the opportunity to do them. I would be open to doing, say, a move away case, given my experience in them. And it's
move away case?
Yes.
What's that?
So if you share custody with an individual and one parent wants to take the children to live elsewhere for whatever reason, and the other parent disagrees, then the court decides and an evaluator decides, and somebody takes a look and says, okay, what's in the best interest of the children? It's a fairly unique legal situation. It's a big deal. That's basically deciding someone's life, and it's an area that I figured I had something to offer, given that I had been through it, and join a relatively small group of attorneys who have some area of expertise in the area.
Okay. So what would you say your breakdown between family law and criminal law then?
90 to 95% criminal law.
Okay. And in that experience, and I know, well, before we get to your private practice here in St. Croix County for the last year plus, what kind of things did you do in California in your 6 years as a prosecutor? What type of cases did you deal with?
Oh goodness, so Los Angeles has no shortage of crime. So everything from gang crimes to special victims crimes, whether that be elder abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, white collar criminal activity, OWIs or DUIs as we call them out there, drug cases, gun cases. California's not a big fan of guns, so we saw quite a bit of those. Pretty much you name it, we saw it. Arson cases, a little bit of everything.
And so you got some trial experience then?
Absolutely. I have over 50 jury trials.
And that was just in Los Angeles? How many here now since you've been here in St. Croix County?
I've done 2 trials since I've been in Wisconsin, one in St. Croix County, one in Polk County.
Okay. All right. So now you are running for district attorney. Let's get to why you're running for that office. You're running, happen to be running as a Democrat. Why are you running as a Democrat?
Well, my parents are UC Berkeley alumni hippies. I don't think I had much a choice insofar as my politics. My grandmother was very active in the women's rights movement, and so she sort of primed me from a young age. I get that Democrat seems to have a bad name around here, which I'm starting to learn and appreciate, and I can understand some of the concerns. But I've been a Democrat since I was, probably before I was young enough to know what that meant. When I was in college, I interned on Capitol Hill with Congressman Adam Schiff. He's a blue dog, so a little bit more socially liberal, fiscally conservative, but he did some good work on the House Judiciary Committee and the International Relations Committee that I found very fascinating.
So you interned at Congress.
Yes.
And you mentioned that you've been a Democrat for a while. Have you been involved with the local party much, or?
I have. They've been very gracious, and I am an official Democratic member.
Okay. Well, you probably know, and you said that it seems to be kind of a dirty word in the county, but I guess it depends on certain pockets,
Sure.
Depending on the community, I guess. But we haven't had a Democrat candidate for district attorney in a long, long time. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yes.
Okay, so why are you running then?
I think I have something to bring to the community. I certainly didn't come here with the idea of running. I had a meeting with the sitting DA, Rick, last summer, where...
Rick Johnson.
Rick Johnson, excuse me,
Yeah.
yes. And where sort of the idea of me running was floated, and I walked away going, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. I've been here for 30 seconds. Why would I run? And then as I experienced more of the office, as I experienced more of the policies and the personalities, I thought, okay, this is something I think I have an area in which I have something to offer, and I could do some really good work. And decided,
okay, tell me an example of policies or practices in action that caused you to push you to run.
Sure. So a criminal prosecutor has an absolute ethical obligation to only bring that which they believe they can prove. So I had situations where I'm bringing issues of proof to the DA and saying, this is why you can't prove this case, this is why we have problems. And the response I got was, well, we can't be lenient on your client because there's a marijuana conviction in the past. I'm going, okay, well, I'm not asking for leniency. I'm telling you that here are the issues with proof. If I'm missing something, let me know. But there didn't seem to be the distinction between leniency and issues of proof. I had one case where I brought a motion to dismiss, and Judge Needham, bless his heart, said, counsel, isn't your timing a little off? Don't we usually have a jury and people put on their case in chief and then you bring this motion? And I said, well, yes, but here's how this cookie crumbles. It was a situation in which it was a middle-aged couple, been married for 20, 30 years. They got into a scuffle in the parking lot. No major injuries. It was a fluke thing. They had no history of violence. Their grandparents, they have no history of criminal history, either of them. And neither one of them wants to prosecute. Neither one of them is going to testify against the other. There's no independent witnesses. There's no way this case gets proven. They both have to pay for attorneys because they don't qualify for a public defender. And just sort of begs the question of what are we doing here? The DA's office put 2 ADAs on it, and we're moving forward in the case. And it came down to the judge saying, look, guys, you have an ethical obligation to only pursue that which you can prove. If I don't see a dismissal on my desk in 60 days, we're setting it for trial. The case ultimately settled for an ordinance, but that was a situation where I'm going, what are we doing here? I've had situations where a young lady, no criminal history, is charged with a felony and for methamphetamine. And this was someone who had a really hard time coming to grips with her identity as an addict, and she didn't want people to think that of her. She didn't want to be able to not get jobs, go to school and whatnot, and so there was some level of denial there. And she came to a point where it was, okay, I want to go to rehab, and it was, I was very excited for her and proud of her, and the goal, I would like to think the community goal is for this person to get sober and be a working member of the community, not somebody who we just flush through the system so that they can be a career criminal their whole lives. The attitude I got from the DA was, well, you reap what you sow, and I don't care if she goes to rehab or not. She can plead to the charge. I'm going, okay. And then I had another case with a young woman who was charged with methamphetamine, but she was working with law enforcement. So they said, okay, we'll give her a misdemeanor. And I'm going, well, I appreciate the decency in the offer, and I'll certainly convey it, and I did, but you have someone who has a problem here. So she's going to have another potential felony sitting in her lap by dinner time. If you send her on her way with this misdemeanor, you're not helping her. I get that she's helping you, and that's fantastic, and I would love to see methamphetamine, opiates, heroin rooted out of St. Croix County, but this sort of short-sighted approaches to cases really sort of irked me on a personal level and on a professional level.
Okay, so critical of this office in particular, or the other western Wisconsin counties that you practice in?
I can't speak to other offices. I will say I am in admiration of how things have been handled down in Pierce. I think Rory and Sean have been very wise in how they've used community resources, how they've embraced restorative justice, recognizing that when you don't have issues of public safety, it does everybody in the community better to address the issue and to try to move this person forward. That sort of gets a bad name for being soft on crime, which kills me because it's actually being smart on crime. It's addressing the issue. That's not to say you don't get the heinous criminals off the street so that they're not hurting anyone, but for those that are just out there being young and dumb, it helps them, it helps their family, it helps the community if you can put them onto another path, so to speak.
Okay, so you've got your examples of cases that you've handled. Have you heard from others that there's issues with the St. Croix County DA's office?
I have, without laying anyone out insofar as specifics, when I take a lot of cases with the state public defender. I'm very bad at being a private attorney because the idea of, sorry, we can't go to trial, you can't afford it, isn't anywhere in my rhetoric. I don't think that's justice. So I don't think I would make it very long as a private attorney. I'm much more comfortable in government service because I can work my cases without having to think of the fiscal aspect of it insofar as charging clients and whatnot. But when I started taking cases for the state public defender, one of the things I was told was the DA's office is full of really nice people, and that's been my experience, very nice people, but that there's been a general lack of leadership. And what I understand of Rick Johnson is that he's a really nice guy and good person and good perspective on the justice system and how things should be held, but from what I understand, isn't really around that much. And so he hasn't had the opportunity to really mentor younger DAs in a way that carries his vision forward.
Well, how would you lead differently if you were the district attorney?
Well, for one, I would stop trying to inflate our numbers to justify the funds.
And how would you see that St. Croix County is inflating its numbers?
From what I understand, the various members of the bench approached the DA's office and basically said, look, we need you to keep your numbers up so we can justify 4 judicial positions. Understandable. With each judge comes a number of support staff members. There are a lot of jobs there. But it seems sort of funny to me that the party that claims to be conservative and for small government is advocating for bigger government. What I would do is you wouldn't see me filing a tremendous amount of bail jumping cases for every little ticky-tacky foul, if you will, to increase the case exposure, to increase the image of case seriousness, or if, say, you have a bad checks case. I've seen situations where they file an individual case for each check as opposed to one charge to encapsulate all of the criminal activity. But I've heard from enough people that it seems to be an issue with artificially inflating numbers, and I don't think that's fair to the taxpayers. And if you want high volume crime, there are many places in the country that'll give you that. St. Croix County is not one of those places, and I'd like to keep it that way.
Okay, well, I understand when there's separate citations, sometimes separate case numbers are issued.
Sure, absolutely.
And so it's your belief that not as many multiple count complaints are being filed instead of single complaints with single counts?
That's the consensus from people I've spoken to.
Okay. And you believe that maybe that's in part with pressure of trying to maintain enough cases to maintain 4 judges in our county?
That's my understanding from people who've been here quite longer than I have. The other issue is the idea of how cases get handled once they're prosecuted or once they're brought. So my experience is you don't get an offer on day one. There's no incentive to settle a case before prelim. So now we are pushing cases through prelim, which means you use the community resources to subpoena witnesses, to take up the court's time to go through these things in situations where the person accused would like to take responsibility and they would like to settle the case.
Did you see fewer instances of preliminary hearings being conducted in California than you do here?
As a function of volume, no, just because there's so many cases there, but the
percentage-wise.
Yes, absolutely. There was an incentive to settle cases. I can't say based on the numbers, and our cases were so serious all the time that there were reasons logistically why things couldn't settle early on. But the level of crime that we have here is so de minimis that there's no reason why we can't be settling these cases. And my understanding is that cases get pushed along as a matter of policy to get them stale, to get them off of whether it's the public radar or what the interest is, to then give the diversion or then dismiss it or do what you want after the case has been around for a while. The problem with that is you spend a tremendous amount of money to say the individual has a public defender. So now that public defender is being paid taxpayer dollars to keep coming to court over and over and over again just to kick the case down the road to ultimately dismiss it. What I would like to see done, and one thing that I would do differently, is get that case settled up front in the first couple of court dates, and then say we have a diversion. Right now they use multiple people to effectuate a diversion, which quite frankly blows my mind. I did my own diversions in LA. All the DAs I knew did their own diversions. This wasn't a 6-person team. This was, you know, somebody who handled their own cases. And so rather than use that time in the courtroom just to kick the case down, use it for progress reports. So you don't need someone picking up the phone saying, hey, are you still in school? Are you still at work? And going through a checklist and paying that person however much in taxpayer dollars. You can do that with progress reports with the court where the person's checking in, and they're much more accountable because they have to go before the judge, explain themselves, and it's much more of an interactive experience that, in my experience, holds people accountable and incentivizes their success, because instead of being on the phone with some support staff member, they're actually in front of a judge, which gets people's attention.
Well, that would, you know, Rick Johnson, as you noted, has been the district attorney for quite a few years, a couple decades plus, and he's the one was instrumental in getting the diversion program that we have. So, are you critical of the diversion program we have in place?
Critical is a bit strong of a word. I admire what he's done in the office. I appreciate what he's done in the office. It's going back to the leadership. So if Rick were there all the time to really mentor these young DAs, I think it would be fantastic. I've spoken to Rick. I agree with his philosophy on crime. I agree with a lot of his perspectives. What I'm seeing is, as implemented, the diversion program leaves a lot of room for improvement. I had one kid who went through his COMPASS, nothing spectacular. No.
COMPASS is a acronym for a diagnostic tool used in prosecuting cases, right?
Yes,
okay.
to give us a sense of how high risk somebody is, what their propensity for recidivism is, where they fall, and sort of antisocial.
They seem
spectrums.
to be using them in more and more cases to try and tailor the justice to the individual.
Absolutely, and they're a great idea and a wonderful tool. So I have a young man, excuse me, he is in a basketball game, and there's a spillover, and he's in his early 20s, the other man was in his 30s. They end up getting into a scuffle. It's more or less mutual combat, but they've decided that my client started it. So that is someone who was, who ultimately got a diversion. But the requirements, and you know, don't get me wrong, I think you should hold people to a high standard. I think you should demand a lot out of them. But I'm looking at this list, this 3-4 page list, and going, okay, if somebody brought me this resume, I would think they were applying to medical school. This is somebody who, you know, has had struggles in life, has challenges. He doesn't have parents who drive him around or buy him a car or buy him insurance. This is someone who is working and is doing well, but you know, the school, the counseling, the job, the volunteering, it gets to be too much at some point, and to the extent that we're setting people up to fail, or the situation where we're saying, okay, absolute sobriety for somebody facing a drug issue. Well, yes, that's ideal. We want sobriety, but that's not realistic if you have somebody who's a full-blown addict. And so it's tailoring the sentence and the resolution of a case to the individual such that they can succeed, and not setting them up for failure.
Okay, what about drug court? That's another innovation over the last 20 years, within the last 20 years. Wasn't heard of back then, but now would you continue it, discontinue it, expand it, contract it?
I absolutely love and appreciate drug court. What's interesting, in going back really quickly to the diversion program, we have a restorative justice center here in St. Croix County. From what I understand, it is very much underutilized. In the year that I was in the office, not one attorney mentioned it to me as an option or discussed it for any of the cases I handled. Similarly with drug court, it's very exclusive in that you have to be a very high-risk individual. So unless you are far along on your criminal career, or your criminal path, if you will, I've seen people get turned away, and these are people who are addicts and they would like to get sober. They'd like to get help to get sober. They've been sitting in jail, taking advantage.
Their conduct hasn't been bad enough or long enough.
Well, and they're not on the brink of prison, separate and apart from their felony drug charge, so they get denied drug court. One of the things that quite frankly blew my mind, I was at the 10-year celebration of drug court a while back. Donna Berger was there, but Mike wasn't there, Rory wasn't there. No single DA from that office was there. We had a speaker from intervention, and we had 2 bench officers there. It really was something special. There was a number of drug court graduates who were there, a number of speakers who were there. Liesel, who's over at the public defender's office, she was there. And it was a really special experience to show the participants of drug court, the community, that this is a valuable asset to us. I was there because drug court is something that I think is an invaluable resource for the community. But I was very disappointed to see that it seems to be a low-level priority for the current DA's office. That's something I'd absolutely change. I don't know that tweaking their model and letting people in that are lower risk is the right answer, but I do believe the DA's office needs some sort of program that incentivizes people getting help sooner so that they don't get further into their addiction and further burden their families, the community at large, before the justice system is helpful in getting them sober.
Well, it sounds like that could involve, I mean, some of your ideas are aimed at cutting costs, but things like drug court are not cheap either, and starting that earlier in the process it does mean more money because you're trying to catch more people and prevent them from getting further down the criminal path.
I understand that perspective, and I think that's a bit of a misconception. The analogy that makes sense to me, because I lived it in college, was how I fed myself. So I grew up, my parents went to the grocery store once a week. My dad spent about $100, and that was our food for the week, and it worked. As a young college student, that never felt comfortable for me. It felt like I was spending more money. And so as a result, I wouldn't go to the supermarket once a week. I would eat out every time I was hungry. And it would be $2 here, $3 here, $5 there. And it felt like I was spending less, but if you took a look at what I was spending much more than if I was just proactive and buying my groceries up front. My experience as the criminal justice system is very similar. There's a tremendous amount of sticker shock for any sort of preventative funding, and I get it. Government is incompetent all over the place. So I understand the hesitation of not wanting to give more money to various entities for it to be wasted, because that happens all too often. But on the alternative is that we do nothing and then pay for it on the back end. So the cost of policing, prosecuting, incarcerating is so exorbitant. We are spending millions upon millions of dollars on issues that could be handled for tens of thousands of dollars. But going back to your issue with, isn't it going to cost more money? No, not at all. So we have an individual who comes in with their possession of meth as a felony. My offer to that person would be, show me your completion of 30 days of rehab and we will dismiss the case. Now, if somebody hurts somebody, threatens somebody, drives while under the influence of meth, that's a separate charge, and we're going to prosecute them for their conduct to the fullest extent of the law. But if you're coming in with possession and you're telling me you're an addict and you want to get healthy and sober, fantastic. Show me your rehab and we'll talk. And we know that recovery isn't a linear progression up. People take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So when that person does well for 6 months and then comes back and relapse, one of the things, on a quick tangent, that I've been really disheartened by is some of the rhetoric coming out of the DA's office and how they describe people suffering from addiction. These are bad guys, it's a very us versus them scenario or description, and these people, whether we like it or not, are part of our community too. So we can ostracize them and put them off to be, lesser than everyone else. It doesn't do them any good. It certainly doesn't do their family any good, but it also doesn't do the community any good. So I think the sort of shaming that goes on is absolutely counterintuitive. It makes us all feel better of, well, as long as that guy's the criminal, I'm a good guy and we're fine. But the reality of the situation is it's counterintuitive. But going back to my original point, you have that person relapse, assuming they're not hurting anybody, threatening anyone, doing anything. Nice to see you again. same offer. Do you want to go into rehab again? And at some point, you start asking for longer stints of rehab, 30, 60, 90 days type thing. But I think working with people, incentivizing their sobriety and their ability to get healthy would be a huge step forward, and it wouldn't cost anyone anything, whether it be through private insurance, public insurance, that's something they would have to figure out on their own.
All right. Well, thank you for spending the time to come in and talk. I'm sorry we have to go, or I see we're out of time. But how do people find out more about you and where you stand on the issues?
Sure. I have a website, www.sarahyacoub4da.com. I also have a Facebook page. I'm happy to answer any questions on any issues and can be contacted through those two sources.
So Facebook and Sarah Yacoub, 4
DA.
DA. Very good. And is it .org or .com?
Oh, .com.
.com. All right, very good. We got your website on there, got the Facebook. And I want to thank you, the viewers, for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, and keep watching.